Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and he sat down. His disciples came to him and he began to teach them. I've got a question for you. Have you gotten onto the began to teach them journey yet? You see, we're in the most famous part of Jesus' teaching in all of the scripture. It's Matthew chapters 5 through 7. There's a version in Luke there too, but Matthew 5 through 7, that's the one that gets a lot of attention. And when we read this, and we read all of the great content about divorce and remarriage and adultery and all of this stuff about false prophets and false disciples and the Beatitudes themselves, well, we tend to want to skip these very first two verses. I think it's a big mistake. And I think that because this is really personal to me. My journey with Jesus started in reading Matthew chapters 5 through 7. I got a Bible, I opened it up, it fell right there to the beginning of Matthew. I read along the Christmas story, it was kind of interesting. And then all of a sudden when I read Matthew chapter 5, starting in that verse 1, something happens to me. I have this getting on the Jesus teaching journey. Only way I could describe it is it was like Jesus was talking directly to me. I didn't think about the crowds and how many of them were the 12 disciples sitting around him, or it was just like all of a sudden Jesus sat down and I sat down and he started saying these things. And I got to emphasize this. I didn't understand it. I did not understand it. I didn't understand anything. I didn't know the difference between the Old and New Testament then. I didn't know why some of the letters in the Bible were red and some of them were black. I didn't understand any of the prophecies. I didn't understand the cross. I didn't understand the difference between Catholics and Protestants. I didn't even know what that was. For the longest time, I thought there was a book in the Old Testament called the Book of Job, J-O-B, because I was clueless about spiritual things. And yet, I wasn't. Because deep in me, these words resonated. When Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," I felt conviction. I thought, I don't think my spirit is as impoverished, or I'm not as aware of that poverty. And when he said, "Blessed are those that mourn," I began to feel like maybe I didn't care for people to the level that Jesus was talking about. When he said, "Blessed are the meek," I knew that I had too much arrogance and pride and that insecurity that wants to put me first in every situation. I immediately started to see, even though I knew nothing about anything theologically, I immediately began to see that Jesus was calling me to a higher, a different, a better life. I began to just be mesmerized by these words. I began to go, this is everything. I want to know what it means to be blessed, what it means to be poor in spirit, what it means to have a purity of heart or to thirst, really thirst for righteousness. And it all began with just a moment where I decided to sit at the feet of Jesus and listen. My friend, you can learn everything there is to know technically about these Beatitudes, about the different kingdom rivalries that were going on in the Middle East at that time, and about who Jesus was actually speaking to, and what the context was from Herod the Great to his failed sons who were leading at that time. You could learn all that and not learn a thing. On the other hand, you could know nothing and see the profound, incredible, life-giving beauty of these words. I want to encourage you, as you tune into these refuels, as you join us in this study of the Sermon on the Mount, would you make a purposeful moment to sit at the feet of Jesus like those first disciples did? To open your heart wide and say, even the things I cannot quite grasp now. I've been studying this for 30 plus years. I'm looking at this now and going, man, I'm just starting to maybe get exactly what he means. Would you have that moment where you do exactly what the verse says? Now, when Jesus saw Curt, he went up on a mountainside and he sat down, and Curt came to him and he began to teach Curt. At the very end of this famous passage, at 7, it says this about the crowds. This is chapter 7, verse 28 and 29. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed. The Greek word there really means overwhelmed. I think if you'll open your heart to the words of Jesus in this particular passage and go on this journey, you're going to be overwhelmed with God's goodness, God's grace, God's righteousness, and the higher calling of life in God's kingdom.